it's feared that coronavirus has ravaged the economy to such an extent that unemployment could rocket to over 4 million by the end of the year.
Well, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown thinks he may have a solution and is launching a campaign which he believes can save thousands of jobs. And I'm pleased to say Gordon Brown joins us now from Fife. The pandemic has affected so many people, cost so many lives and so many livelihoods. What do you think the solution is to the absolute fear of this enormous amount of unemployment that's heading our way?
Well, first of all, Kate, this is the first time I've done an interview with you since the lockdown and since Derek fell ill. And really, our hearts go out to you, to Derek, and of course to Darcy and Billy. I think they're now 14 and 10, is that right? And really, you've been so brave. You're a wonderful family, and we just hope that Derek gets better. And as you say, so many families have suffered. And when we saw a few minutes ago Ben talking about the Battle of Britain, we had this massive spirit of unity around the country. And we need to rebuild that unity so that we can face the next stage. I think there was a consensus, and I think the Treasury led it, on the rescue plan. But we need now a recovery plan. We need to avoid a cliff edge on October the 31st. The health successes have been too few for us to be able to say that the lockdown is completely over for everyone. And therefore, we need new measures. And I don't think the government's plan is up to it. And what I say is three things. One is extend the furlough part-time in particular sectors, perhaps linked to some training programs. Secondly, we've got to help young people. We face the worst labour market for young people for 50 years. And thirdly, we've got to help businesses recover. They need to invest, and they can't invest if they're having to pay back some of the loans that have been charged upon them in the last few months. We need to do all these things, and we need to do it urgently to avoid what's going to happen in October.
It's a phrase that's used an awful lot, isn't it? These are unprecedented times. It's something that no one's faced in terms of pandemic and the impact not only on our livelihoods and our way of lives, but also the economy as well. I mean, the argument will be, Gordon Brown, is that the government have done as much as they can right now, and actually we can't afford to carry on supporting the furlough scheme. We just don't have the money, and we need to try and get people back into the offices and get them back to work as soon as we can. By extending that, we aren't actually helping.
Yeah, but the government has just imposed new rules about meetings, about people being in places with other people, and they're asking businesses to return to full activity, which is impossible when that is the case. But we've got to think about people here. And I think, you know, I've been talking to the mayors of Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield, Bristol, London. I've been talking to the Welsh First Minister. I've been talking to the unions and to businesses. And everybody knows that if unemployment gets, and the minister on the programme, a few minutes ago admitted 3 million people could be unemployed. If it gets to that stage, then we are facing long-term damage, losing skills, losing capacity. We cannot afford not to spend now to save later.
Gordon, you mentioned Derek, and one of the things that I've learnt is, and I want to say to you actually publicly, because you're always very private about the personal good things you do and very public about your passions about the issues, but you've been personally very kind to me and probably one of the most helpful practically, actually, apart from, of course, all the incredible teams that have been practically working on within the NHS. But you've been amazingly helpful, and so I thank you personally for that.
Well, you're one of the most wonderful people.
Well, thank you very much for that. But what I've found, Gordon, is not just you, not just people in the Labour Party that may have worked with Derek, but right across the political board, I've seen so much kindness from politicians and so much desperation about the solution. And when we're talking about this, can you find sort of in your heart, if you like, if you were still in charge, to see how impossible this is? You were the man for most of your time with the finger on the wallet, on the Treasury. The idea of sort of subsidising vast parts of industry to prevent unemployment must be an impossible headache for the government.
Yes, but this is a once-in-a-century event. It is totally unparalleled. And we can't just destroy our economy and the capacity and skills in it because we're worried about the next pound. We really have to take action now to save money later. And, you know, I worry about youth unemployment because in some communities, you were talking about diversity a few minutes ago, in some communities, unemployment among blacks will get to 20, 25%. young people, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, who will get to 50%. We cannot allow this to happen because the scarring that is done for the long term is so huge. And we've got to act as a community. I want the same spirit of unity, bringing people together. The government should be talking to these people about the next stage of what we do. And I think we can unite around a national plan that takes us through the next few months. I've made about 6 suggestions about different policies. One is improve the youth employment programme. A second is help businesses who can't both invest and pay back their loans by maybe taking shares in them if necessary on a temporary basis. Give the Bank of England a stronger remit to pursue employment as one of its mandates. Help the town centres and get them back to life where it becomes possible. But recognise that you can't expect the economy to be back at full capacity if every day you're changing the rules and telling people that they can't do certain things that are necessary to keep businesses in being.
You're talking there about sort of the waking up of city centres and towns, the coffee shops, the restaurants, the small businesses that desperately need people to be going back to work. There was a glimmer of some hope this morning. The Office for National Statistics reported gross domestic product grew by 6.6% in the month this month as parts of the economy started to wake up. We are still way down where we should be, of course, from last year, 11.7% below the peak in July. But I just sort of the concern people will have, of course, Gordon, is by the extension of the furlough scheme, the idea that you're going to keep people at home and they're not going to be going back to the town centres. This slight glimmer, the awakening, is going to be put back to sleep again. I hear what you're saying about the rule of 6 that the government has brought in and the impact that might have, but we still need that economy to start churning, to start moving. And from what has been positive signs over this last month, there's a real concern that it's going to go backwards now.
Well, look, I think part-time work may be one of the answers to keep companies in being and to keep people in the labour market. That's what they're doing in Germany and France, and we have too little of it here. When it comes to local lockdowns, which are happening right over the country, of course, if you want people to stay at home, you can't deprive them of the income that they need to feed their family. And this £90 a week payment is simply not enough. And my fear is that people, out of desire to help their families, will go to work even if they feel ill, if we don't do something that is better. So I'm talking about the national interest here, and I do think that it's necessary to change the plan because it's not going to work in a period where the health recovery has not really happened and where, of course, we have rising unemployment as part of this cliff edge on October the 31st when all the furlough ends. Now, why don't you say part-time work, temporary in particular sectors, and also combine it with some retraining so that people can get ready for the new economy of the future?
The other problem that seems to have surged back in that we all stopped talking about, didn't we, because of the pandemic, is Brexit. And we've seen the government appearing to be about to break international law if they continue with this position of rewriting parts of the withdrawal agreement, criticised by their own party, criticised by MPs, criticised by very senior members of the government, past and present, because they're breaking international law. Can you ever imagine a situation where Labour was in power when somebody would have stood up in the House of Commons, member of the Cabinet, and said, we're prepared to break international law? It does seem an extraordinary moment, doesn't it?
No, and if we'd done it, I think Boris Johnson would be the first to say that Labour was breaking the rule of law. I would not do this. This is an act of self-harm. It's an own goal. You can't expect to have a decent negotiation with the European Union if you start by breaking a treaty that you signed yourself and negotiated only a few weeks ago. And I think Boris Johnson's got to wake up to the fact that it's in the national interest, and I'm talking about national unity and how we can make the economy do better, that we don't have a clean break, that we have actually something other than a no deal. And I think it can be negotiated. We've got a problem of a fishing rights, state aids. It can all be dealt with. But my fear is not just a no deal. My fear is we'll have such a minimal deal that we'll be in battle with Europe for years ahead. And that really does not make sense if we want people to have jobs in our economy.
Why haven't we heard more from Keir Starmer on this? We were talking earlier with Ian Dale and Jackie Smith, one of your former colleagues, of course, Jackie Smith. We will talk about her and Strictly. I'm sure you're keen to talk about that as well. But let's talk about Keir Starmer, because Ian was making the point that we haven't heard from Keir Starmer on this issue, because right now it doesn't necessarily suit him to be holding his hand up as a Remainer when we've voted to leave and we're leaving. But if you think it's the wrong thing, would you like to see the Labour leader making more of a fuss about this?
Well, Keir has had a spectacular start as leader of the Labour Party. I mean, he's talked about jobs, he's talked about health, he's forced U-turn after U-turn on the part of the government. And I think he will be talking about the failure to negotiate a proper deal with Europe in the next few weeks. Let's wait and see what happens in these negotiations. But I don't think he'll be silent if the government is going to go for a no deal. Remember, so much of our food comes in from Europe, so much of our medical equipment comes in from the rest of Europe. We cannot afford to put people's lives at risk and put food at risk if we have a no deal exit. And Keir will be speaking out on that, I'm absolutely sure.
Well, spectacular sounds like a 9 out of 10 from you, Gordon, for how Keir Starmer's doing. What would you give out of 10 in Strictly judging? Oh, 10 out of 10, that's great. How much would you give Jackie Smith, do you think? How do you think she's going to do on Strictly? And I've got to quickly ask you, would you ever do it?
Well, I was actually talking to Ed Balls last night, and I know he's been encouraging Jackie with the right advice. People want people to try hard, to work hard, and to make things work for them. And I think Jackie is one of those people who will work really hard, as she said this morning when I listened to her on the programme. But it's not for me. I don't think I could do it, and it's not something I could do well.
You've never danced to her at any of those party conferences, parties, or anything. You've got no sort of insight on her form.
Well, I'll be talking to Keir in the next few days, and I hope the party conferences will exhibit a sense that the country has to come together again. We're in the next stage of this crisis. It's not over. The recovery plan is as important as the rescue plan, and I think everybody should come together. I want the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to call in the mayors. I've talked to them. They know what's happening on the ground. The First Minister of Wales, what's happening in Scotland. And I want the unions and business to come together to look at what could actually be practically done. We had a spirit of consensus a few months ago. I would hate it to break down, but we have an immediate set of decisions to make, that we don't allow a cliff edge on October the 31st. We don't allow 1.5 million more people to be unemployed. We do not allow people to suffer and their livelihoods gone forever, with their skills going and capacity in business never to return. We can't allow that to happen.
One last thing, Gordon, if we may, because we've talked to you for many years. Kate and I have been doing this programme when you were in Cabinet, when you were the Prime Minister, and you were never shy of coming on and facing criticism, facing difficult questions and answering those questions. Does it surprise you that the current government won't come on to Good Morning Britain and answer some of the questions we'd like to put to them?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake. Look, you know, a Prime Minister is there to be criticised for getting things wrong, particularly if you have so many U-turns. The funny thing about Boris Johnson is that there are two Latin words. He's favourites at talking about Latin words. There's two words he doesn't seem to know: mea culpa. He's got to take some responsibility, and he's got to talk to the people of this country directly with questions put by people as good as you and Kate.
Well, that's a good endorsement. 136 days. We'll see if he comes on Monday now after your recommendation. Yeah. Lovely to talk to you.
Good to speak to you this morning, Gordon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Always. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
A little twinkle there. I think he's seen Jackie Smith's form at a party conference dancing. He knows.
What have they done? Bit of Birdie song? I don't know. Something like that. That dates.
After Ed Balls' Gangnam Style, what on earth could she do?